And hello, and welcome everyone to our Techspressionist virtual salon here on the 16th of March, just after the Ides of March. If you are Caesar, I'm sorry. But with that, I'm your moderator, Davo Bradley. And joining me today is a whole slew of wonderful, interesting, and creative artists. Some of us here have been around for quite a while. Some other guests here are probably, this might be their first. So if you are new here, welcome. We're not crazy. Not that crazy, maybe a little crazy. Mostly very, very nerdy and very intellectual. Have some very deep discussions, which is going to segue into what we're doing today. Having a very deep discussion. Today, we actually are doing our salon a little differently, whereas our normal setup is to have between 2 or 3 presenters, artists present their work, and we'll normally have a Q&A session. But today, we're doing kind of a first, where we actually have a discussion topic for the salon. And that today's topic was voted on to be obsolescence or obsolescence. Now I probably should have looked into how to pronounce that. Obsolescence. English is hard, by the way.
It is. Yeah, I once said superfluous to someone when I was younger, and they went, "What?" And it's superfluous. But you know, if you've read it and haven't said it, that's how you learn.
Mm-hmm. I was actually one of those people too that I also said superfluous, but that just means you learned that word from reading rather than hearing it from somebody.
That's right. Yeah.
So in any case, so to kick things off, now this is going to be kind of a controlled discussion, so nobody's going to be talking over each other. So how this should play out, how I'm imagining things, is that I'll get things going, and then one person will share their thoughts, and then the next person will share their thoughts, and back and forth like that. Kind of more like a controlled organic conversation, if that makes sense, which I hope it does. But I have a question to actually kick things off that I prepared just for this occasion. So, that being said, what does it mean for something to be obsolete? We all know that, you know, dictionary definitions say one thing, and dictionaries report the common usage of a term, but common usages don't always reflect, you know, what the core idea behind an idea is. But kind of as a springboard, that's usually what we use. It's the first thing that we go to. So we have it as both an adjective and as a verb. And to be obsolete is to cause a product or idea to be or become obsolete by replacing it with something new. As in the case of, you know, we're trying to stimulate the business by obsoleting last year's designs. Or in another case, no longer produced or used, something that's out of date. The disposal of old and obsolete machinery. Now that kind of scratches the surface of what this idea actually means, especially for artists that use, one, that, you know, have maybe some familiarity with the traditional art space, and two, in the context of technology, because a lot of us actually use both. So what does obsolescence or being obsolete mean for us? I'm assuming everyone's ruminating on it. I can see the pensive stares.
This is David. I'll take a crack at it. I actually really never thought about it until 5 minutes ago. And artists could have a lot of fun with this, because something that would be considered obsolete, like a radio tube, is like precious to an audiophile. Right? And it could be used as art or some type of piece of technology could actually be used for something or mean something or be put in a museum to be remembered. Now, maybe people aren't buying it anymore, but it is still technology. How do you even define technology? It just creates a really bunch of different interesting questions that I've never thought about before. So I thank you for raising the issue.
You're welcome. And that's kind of the thing with words in general or ideas. A lot of times we kind of take for granted how deep something actually is because we're just used to dealing with kind of surface level interpretations. It helps with conversations but when you really get down to it, there's a lot of interesting things that pop up as a result of trying to dig a little deeper. Tommy, oh, yes, Cynthia.
My concern, and it's been my concern all along, not just mentioning something that is my art, but you know, these things are gone. Will this be gone?
Someday.
Will the formats that I save my images in, will there be other formats and they may abandon, let's say the JPEG or the PNG or the TIFF? Where do we go from there in preserving our digital images and our art? And I think it's very important consideration for us. I'm sure it's for the world because people want to save, whether it's digital archives in a museum or information or history books that may eventually be so old they can't be used. So that whole issue of saving and moving on, transferring, being able to transfer what we have to something else, and then of course what happens to it when we transfer it. But then getting back to what David said, that may get us to create another piece of art with that art that is obsolete or gets transferred and changed. With that, I'll keep quiet.
There's the whole idea too, just regarding what does it mean to be gone, right? Like, I'm sure there could be somebody that attends or watches this recording afterwards, and they'll see your floppy disk, and they won't recognize what that is. Like, they'll probably have no idea what you just held up, and it's like, what is that? A piece of cheese? But but it's when we say it's gone, what I think in a lot of cases what we're saying is like that thing, albeit like unless like all of them are wiped out of existence, it's gone from regular usage. And when things go away from regular usage, you know, of course, support stops for that thing because it's no longer regular usage. Most people have moved on to the next thing. And that keeps going perpetually on and on and on. And so you have this long list of things that they still exist in some capacity. It's just that the things that allowed them to work in the first place, or the way that they used to work, it's no longer easily accessible, or it's not as accessible as it once was. It still exists, still potentially workable. It's just there's a lot more effort that is involved with keeping you stay using those things.
I mean, if you think about art restoration and the need to preserve art that's been affected by the elements in whatever way, I mean, you can easily think down the road there's going to need to be art restoration in the digital world as well, based on exactly what Cynthia was just talking about. I mean, in the past, you know, being old enough that I grew up in a purely analog world before digital became really the prominent mode, when things got upgraded or we thought was obsolete, you still had ways to tinker with them based on the new upgrades. and, you know, think about cars and things like that, is that today, the digital world now, you just throw stuff away and you get something new, because there's no easily accessible way to take a step back and, you know, use a previous version of Photoshop, you know, if you go enough, far enough back or something else. And so we've kind of painted ourselves into this direction that we're headed in as a society, where you don't have the easy, that there's not, in the digital world, there's not the equivalent of what was in the analog world, where you made little baby steps that easily integrated into what went on before. And I think it's gonna, I mean, I know a whole lot of people have been studying the whole issue with what sorts of formats moving into the future are going to survive and move forward. I'm not so worried about that, because I think that's going to happen as we go along. There's going to be new generations saying, okay, there's previous generations of artwork sitting in the cloud or on discs or whatever it is. And if all of a sudden now we've made some transformational evolutionary change in the way we experience art, I think a lot of those things are going to get, you know, moved forward in whatever transitional formats there may come about.
I can't help but think about one, you brought up the issue of backwards compatibility is essentially what that is, like having that step before to accommodate, you know, the newer technology, like when VHSs had DVD players attached to them, or with video game consoles being able to compatible with the games from before, that kind of idea. And with computers, file formats haven't changed too much over the years. Like those have been pretty stable, but I can't help but imagining like the digital artistic equivalent of like something along the lines like maybe digital patina. It's like, we know like the Grecian sculptures, a lot of them used to be painted, right? And all of them lost their color because over the years, the paint was just not there, but we still have the marble underneath. And we still consider it like, this is still a great work of art, even though it was not in its original state. And I'm just wondering, like, what would that look like for art that is not analog? Like, what does that look like for digital art? Like, would we, like, if we boot it up into whatever modern technology that we have, or whatever modern pieces of ways of experience it, and we start noticing like there's data degradation, or there's actual glitches as a result of the data aging, and, you know, it's like, would we also take into, like, would we also come to appreciate that kind of thing happening? And I know there actually are some artists that like, they take that to the extreme already. Like, I'm going to pass this file back and forth and see what the end result looks like. And after, you know, because data is lost after each exchange, and the original image gets changed subtly over time as the pixels stop copying correctly, because it's not a perfect process. So I don't know, it's fun trying to think about what that would look like. Yes, Lee.
I would say, you know, my wife is a digital artist. She does web work and that type of work, but fine art. And this is an issue that they've been dealing with forever, because you know, PHP on the server will change and your piece no longer works, and you have to go back and hopefully rebuild it, or your piece is constructed in such a way that it's referring to URLs and pulling in data from other places, and those places disappear or no longer exist, and so the piece just breaks down. And so, you know, on a certain level, you can talk about some art being ephemeral, so that it isn't going to last. The Dadaists made ephemeral art that we're still trying to hold on to. You know, it was made with newspapers and stuff that they wanted to break down and die, and we're still trying to keep, you know, put chemicals on it to keep them from breaking down and die. And you know, looking forward, I would throw NFTs into that. So Ethereum and the contracts you're building your NFTs on are really very new. And you're going to have iterations on how these contracts, how the programming in them is developed and encapsulates whatever information is in there. Also, you're not going to lose the art because the art is actually on IPFS, which is a file system. Unless, of course, your art just disappears from IPFS, which is also possible, because if it doesn't, it's sort of use it or lose it. And if no one uses it, it may just disappear. So, you know, the digital world is sort of at its foundation a bit ephemeral. And that has, you know, and that's not even touching on what Apple does to their iPhones. So
we touched a little bit on that last time.
Yeah.
Cynthia, did you, it looks like Cynthia and Ross both had something to share.
Yeah.
Go first.
Okay. Well, it just, I don't know. I always think on things in like 7 different layers at once, but this whole thing brings up so much. And Davo, you've presented it and well. But you know, the spiritual and the ephemeral for me has been so combined since the earliest days of working in this crazy machine. But the thing about NFTs, even though part of that landscape really drives me kind of crazy, because I feel like, I don't know, I think it's still it's so young and raw, and I think there's some good work being shown and lots that's just about the gold rush. But at the same time, the very fact that provenance is given in our landscape to those who've been working with, whether you even started with Photoshop, I mean, I started with software programs, but their underlying code is the dirt that we work with. And that dirt has all of a sudden been a place that you can demarcate, you know, marketing and collecting and other provenance and historical ways to remember a work of art besides in the physical space that we know. So this whole obsolescence idea is fascinating to me, and also for the reason that my father was a renowned surgeon and kept all these slides and things of his stuff, and I can't help but get into the biblical passages of dust to dust. Like, you know, if we can let go of ego, I think, who was it, Lee, talking about the fact that the Dadaists, you know, we're trying to keep those very things they wanted to destroy. I guess I just keep coming back in my own life when I feel a little like, oh, what's the point? You know, we've gone from floppies to this, to that, to that. But, you know, you'd almost feel, I mean, you can either look at it and say, nothing makes sense, nothing makes a difference and everything does. And you don't really know what you're offering out to the world, what is going to make a difference. So I always sort of come back to that idea that art itself and the creation is what makes the difference. And we just have to keep creating and speaking out to the world. And we don't really know if our pieces are going to last. I mean, I've rolled up quite a few of my own. They're not quite in the same format, like Flash Shockwave and stuff. I mean, they're videos now. But it is even if things are, it's a very exciting world to be in, and yet it's I don't know, I sometimes I don't know, I might just drop it all at some point and go back to oil on canvas, because those pieces are really lasting really well, even in bright sunshine. So
but what about fire?
What?
But what about fire?
Well, yeah, I mean, at a point we're all defying death. I mean, we really are in a way. It's like I mean, if I roll up this to that and I roll up this to that, and there's something to be said for letting go, but there's also something to be said for the beauty of history and knowledge and keeping things so that others know what happened.
The value of preservation.
My father once called this place where I find myself a lot, he called it divine tension. And I don't know if it helps any of you, but we're always looking for, oh, this is the answer when I find it. And he said, if you're in that place of divine tension, and I don't mean necessarily even in a religious sense, but where two very important opposing things are going on, that's still a great place to be. And we get in those places here a lot, and it makes it a very invigorating salon. Yeah,
Agreed right there with you.
I rarely give answers, and I don't know if it's more like the questions.
What about,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, what about turning this on its head and making art that has a built-in obsolescence? If it's digital art, it has an expiration date, and then it's gone.
Great.
Best by this date. Yeah, our version of Snapchat.
No, but put it in on purpose. And then the art is there for people to see for a certain amount of time in a moment, and then it's gone. And then maybe you have a poster or something to preserve it, or photos so people can see that it was created, but the actual digital or technological piece is gone.
I promise you some people will keep it.
Screenshot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Justin?
Davo, I have something to share for briefly, if I could jump in real quick. This topic made me take a little trip down memory lane. Just going to share my screen real quick. Can you see this screen?
Yep.
So this is on Steve Miller's site. Ooh, that was weird. My computer just
Was
started
that
talking
Siri?
to me. That was Siri. That never happened before. So this is a project that I worked on with Steve Miller back in 1999 called Dreaming Brain. It was a web-based piece that we worked on together in a collaborative way, and it was shown at a place called the Equitable Gallery in New York City. And this is an example of obsolescence where the piece was generally, I mean, it was basically constructed using two obsolete technologies, now obsolete, QuickTime VR and Real Video. Real Video was the streaming linear time-based component, and QuickTime VR was the virtual reality component. And we shot the scenes using a Sony Mavica camera, which took floppy disks. You actually inserted the floppy disk into the camera, and then would shoot panoramas that got stitched together in a program called QuickTime VR Authoring Studio. So the only sort of remnant of the project is the domain still exists, and the HTML shell that I put together still is there. And basically, like, some of the components, and these are basically GIF animations in the intro, which there's Steve, and then it jumps to an intro screen, which is also a GIF animation on top of another GIF animation that's tiled. So this is like fun with old school HTML. And then basically, like, you can't view it anymore. And we've talked about different ways to like resurrect the project, and it got some grant funding. It was in a publication, like it was an important piece for both of us, I think, at the time. I was kind of like the ghost producer, and Steve was like the guy who put his name on it initially. We sort of like on the web, we shared credit for it, but it was a really fun project to work on. And at this point, I can't even get a version of QuickTime old enough to run QuickTime VR anymore. So I can't even like take the panoramas for a spin. And we like went into the panoramas and made them these really crazy, like surreal, like the whole piece was about Freud and psychoanalysis. So like we shot, like a playground, and then went into the actual pano file in Photoshop and edited in like all sorts of weird stuff. Like Steve like pulled out toys from his childhood, and like I photoshopped them into the panorama and like different other weird things. And it was really fun, and it's sad. I was like looking through the source materials. I was like, where are the original movies that I encoded into Real Video? Like, and I don't even think I have them anymore. I still have the floppy disks, and I don't have a drive to run them on. And like Tommy was saying in the chat, with zip disks and then like SciQuests and all these other old media, I mean, it's just like, what's gonna happen? They'll just be in the landfill, But the one thing that I find that's really fun is emulators. I'm like
I was actually just thinking about
addicted to
emulators.
emulators. Yeah. So like, I've been running actually a lot of the stuff that I've been doing now with the AxiDraw. I've been processing photographic images through Adobe Streamline, which I had to install an emulator on my Mac to run and install Streamline because it's not supported for a couple decades now in Mac OS. But you could do some really cool like vectorization things with it that I can't figure out how to do with any new software. So anyway, that's all out of me.
And for those that don't know, who are tuning in, an emulator is literally just like a virtual version of it's a piece of software that mimics or copies how another piece of software is supposed to function. So like, say you wanted to use Windows 98, you could create a virtual version of Windows 98 and recreate that environment and have software run off of it. People have done this with computer software. People have done this with video games, notoriously for video games. It's a very interesting, useful tool. It's also how some people have been able to do things like put Windows on a Mac computer, because you can have a Windows emulator on a Mac.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a very, very interesting thing.
There's if for any of you Mac users out there, there's one called Sheep Shaver that lets you install like Mac OS 8, 9, whatever onto like a modern Mac. And then there's an actual place called the Macintosh Software Repository, where you can download disk images of like all the old software, I mean, games, Castle Wolfenstein, whatever, you know what I mean? And it's pretty cool. But like, and a lot of the old Adobe software, they basically don't care. Like, you know, that serial numbers and stuff are floating out there. It's to the point that like no one really cares, you know. But that was back in the day. And even Commodore 64, there's a ton of C64 emulators. I mean, I was thinking about this topic earlier and looking on YouTube, and like, I mean, with the Commodore, that was my first introduction to like real, I don't know, like there was a thing called the demo scene, where these cracking crews they would crack games and then release demos that would precede the cracked video game, almost like graffiti, but digital graffiti, like in the 80s. And some of that stuff was just better than the games, you know. If you go on YouTube, like, and look up like, you know, 80s demo scene or C64 demo scene, Apple II had a demo scene also. And there was a sort of competition between like the Apple II people and the Commodore people or whatever. So anyway, trip down memory lane.
And I guess, well, when you're in the middle of something, these new things, like in the 80s and 90s, when we were experimenting with all this, you didn't really think about the fact that, oh, Flash Shockwave won't be here, Macromedia Director won't be here. You know, it's, and I guess with NFTs, as someone is, all of us or a few have talked about, NFTs they'll change too. But you got to dive in there anyway. The whole emulator thing, though, I think you have to, in order to save it, you have to really make a video of the emulation. At least that's how I've done it with a young programmer I've been working with, is that he goes back to a certain, he uses an emulator and he goes back to a certain Mac machine. He's got a basement full of things. He runs it and then he's taken a video in terms of things when it's animated. Does that make sense to you, Colin or Davo? Because I don't think
you could sometimes export it out within the emulator. Like what I'd been doing with that Streamline is you could run it and save it out in a format like EPS or something like that still is readable. You know, like, so like if you're in an emulator that's modern enough, you could probably output like a .mov file or something else that then you could bring in, you know, like there might be a crossover point.
Yeah, getting back to what Roz and David and Lee were talking about, the ephemeral quality of what we do, and how that's okay being a part of that. I agree. And I think almost I see it like we're creating mandalas that eventually will, you know, wash away. But the whole idea is not just the end product, but the journey of what we're doing is important. And even if we look at it as a performance, you know, when actors create a performance, very often it could be taped, but sometimes there are live performances that are not taped and you need to be there to see it and have the experience. So I think there's validity to that. I also, we're cognizant of the fact that capitalism and progress promotes planned obsolescence. We don't have obsolescence because we can't use something anymore because something new comes along, but they want something new to come along. So, so we flow with the tide, we adapt, do whatever. But yeah, I like that idea of we are part of that journey, and that's remarkable as well.
I wanted to say something to what Cynthia just mentioned, because I just recently ran into this obsolescence thing, not so much with my artwork, but with the large Epson printer that I have, a big 44-inch one. It works great. I only use it a few times a month. It's perfect. They've made the inks obsolescent. So now this huge printers can end up as landfill. And I'm going to have to go out and spend another $5,000 or $6,000 because they're expensive to get another big one. And that really upsets me. Not so much the money aspect, which of course is part of the problem, but that it will end up in the landfill and that it is a perfectly good piece of equipment. And to just say that, oh, now the inks can't be made for it anymore. It's progress, but I'm not so sure it's good progress. And will the new inks or the new big printer be any better than this one? I doubt that. So I think it's a problem, a little bit. And I just ran into this just the other day. I found out I can no longer get the ink. So the whole concept of obsolescence is really fresh in my mind. Good topic to bring up, Davo.
Tommy just mentioned, he asked whether or not you can still refill the cartridges, or do they just like stop the ink production period?
They did stop the particular ink production period. I could get off-market inks, what they're called. They are not archival, and they are not as good as the other ones. And since I do it for my oil paintings and that I incorporate, printed images, I have to make sure that it's the real stuff and archival. Because I did look into that. Unfortunately, can't refill them with the good stuff.
That actually is kind of how, like, that whole idea is kind of how we got or brought this subject up during our last discussion, because I kind of made a comment. I was like, were there artists back in the day that, there was a plant or something that, it went extinct and they could no longer produce that hue anymore from that particular plant? What happened there? And I feel like this is kind of a more modern version of that, where it's not necessarily that the thing has gone extinct. It's just that the people creating it, or like how it's actually produced, it's just, they've just stopped production, period. But it has the same effect of you no longer having access to, that ink or that pigment or what have you. And
I'm thinking a lot about that as a person that's done photography for about 35 or 40 years, and how much photographers have used the idea of using obsolete materials and methods over time, because, and I may be saying this to people that already know this, because silver printing, the reason silver printing happened wasn't because people wanted to do it, it was because of Kodak. And so that whole way of creating photography was driven by money, like most of the things that we're talking about now, but from a long time, because the way that people were producing photographs were with the cyanotype and Van Dyke Brown and those different chemicals. Anyway, so that transition happened. I don't know what years. Tommy can probably tell you what years better than I, because I don't hold on to that history info. But I think a lot about this because as a person that's gone from totally analog, black and white photography, making film images with negatives through, and resisted so strongly a digital camera for so long. And now I've embraced digital work just totally. I still, and I mentioned this in the chat, I have years and years of negatives, which I could use some of those, but I also relate to the idea of like, what am I gonna let go of? Like how many books of those negatives and negative sheets am I gonna just either give away if I can find some place to give them to, or am I gonna find the clients? I had all those clients that I did pictures of for all those years. So I'm thinking a lot about it as I'm getting older, and I want stuff gone. I'm done with analog work. And so the other thing for me as an artist is that I find myself wanting to combine those two parts of my art making. And so sometimes I have a project where I'm trying to think, how do I combine my digital work and hard copy work, because I did that for so many years. So that feels like an interesting point for me. And so those are mainly the thoughts that I'm having. I really like this topic because I think about what I'm using and how to combine things that I've used over my lifetime of making art. And so that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I kind of wanted to follow up real quickly from what just Susan just said, because I think implicit in what she was just talking about is another idea that I was thinking about over the last week or so on the topic, is that the idea of obsolescence is, it's kind of inherently, we think like, oh, well, it's because of progress, like moving forward, doing something better or more advanced. That isn't always the case. And what thought that I had was, we as human beings, we get trained into doing things a certain way, and we can become obsolete in the way that we think about stuff, and that we need as well to be humble and realize what our steps are. What do we do? Why do we do that? And I think so. There's like this symbiosis that we have between us, the human, technology interface, and we can be so tunnel vision with how we. So a new technology comes along, and we're still thinking in the way we've been doing things before, and we can't see where this new technology might go because we haven't caught up to it. Our thinking process is back. Well, how can you use NFTs? What can you do with them? And so my thought was, with this whole idea of obsolescence, that it isn't always just about new machines or new technology. It's us, in conjunction with that technology, that we also have to evolve in ways, or we have to get off of what the past was. And then I think of looking at artwork and not understanding where people were coming from in what they created versus what we're doing now, and what are people 200 years from now going to look back on what we're doing, and are they going to scratch their head and think, what the hell were these people doing? What kind of weird stuff was that? And so I just find it really fascinating that we as human beings are part of this component of obsolescence, not only just because of the technology standpoint, but our thought processes that are so integrated into that we oftentimes forget about that.
And I think it's also interesting to note that back to the whole human element being tied inherently to that. Like, even just from an organic perspective, over time, humans have developed obsolete traits or obsolete things that they're just not used anymore. They're still in us, or they're still a part of us, or some remnant of it's still there. But over time, like, we as humans have adapted certain things, and certain things have just either fallen off, shriveled up, or they're there, and it's just like, we don't know what you do, but hey.
Yeah.
And it's interesting though, because that organic element, you can still take that outside of us too, because technology kind of often reflects us in a lot of ways too, because we're the ones that create technology. So gradually, as we adapt and evolve, so will our technology, and then parts and pieces will start falling away as things change and develop over time. And it's not necessarily a nefarious thing. It sometimes, of course, yes, it is spurred on by capitalistic ideas and that kind of thing. But there's also kind of just that natural progression kind of thing. You can't really expect things to stay the same perpetually. There's always going to be that element of something's eventually going to change, whether you want it to or not.
Well, and my last point that I wanted to just mention real briefly is going back to my game background. We have now created AI that the most sophisticated human chess players don't stand a chance anymore, or the most sophisticated Go players cannot. So are we going to create AI that creates artwork that is so much cooler than what we can do as human beings? I hope not, but it's just this my whole point with obsolescence and the human computer, the human technology interface.
You know what that idea kind of reminds me of too, going from the religious angle. It's like the question of, can God create a boulder that he himself cannot lift? So are we going to create a piece of technology that far exceeds that something that we'll even be able to understand? And I think that's happening already. Like we're well on that road. Yes, Ross?
Yes, I love crosstalk because, for me, I think that when creatives get together and they crosstalk, things happen. But I also know that some people hate that. But I think that's where the things get snapping. I have to just say here, share with you guys that I just read for the first time, really thoughtfully, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein. And it is awesome. It is just so all about what we're talking about here, where, you can say, oh, if a man's reach doesn't exceed his grasp, what's a heaven for? At the same time, if it does exceed your grasp, I think about this a lot with my guns. And, I think a lot of I have a Kalashnikov out there that I'm not expecting people to love. I didn't do it to promote anything about guns, really, but I'm reflecting our society. But even in that comment, it makes me think about some of the things that Shelley is involved in saying. And it's really like the new Prometheus, where she said this brilliant scientist makes this human himself. He becomes God, and he becomes his own God and makes this human. And he's a brilliant student. And he's also someone who loved the wonders of the world, but he gave that up. Sort of like pitting Enlightenment against Romanticism. And it isn't that time. It's the end of the 18th century. But he makes this monster, and all the monster wants is to be loved, and just because it's ugly and horrible looking, and his father deserts him, so it's got Oedipal complexes and all sorts of things going on in it. But the inventor leaves his invention and doesn't, as a human being, I think we've learned to nurture each other a little better. It's a backward and forward contest over time, but you see this man who thinks he's on some brilliant idea, and it just is a catastrophe. And I think it's true when we make machine guns they're beyond our hearts to understand, really. I think our minds can make them, but when we make nuclear weapons, we have armaments. We have no armaments for Kalashnikovs, and they're all over the place. The Ukrainians are using them against the Russians, and the Russians invented them and probably prevented the Nazis from taking, that was besides the cold winter, that saved. That was a big saving thing, and it was an invention. So I guess that's people say, why do you draw guns? But getting to these topics, and Frankenstein, the other day, my husband, I said, Ross, you look so sad. He said, maybe you should stop reading Frankenstein. And I said, I can't stop. It's great, but there is a point where getting back to all that we're saying, it's also about birth. I mean, death, and that's a spiritual thing. And I am a religious person, but I think, when things die, something else lives. And as to the thinking of with Michael, if some of us are older, can possibly even grasp these new things and encourage the young, I think that we have to do that and sometimes step aside and go, yeah, I can't make the greatest NFTs, but I'm part of the history. And that's where we need people. I think this whole dialogue is good because we don't have too many critics and journalists who are connecting all these thoughts and stuff. And if we don't have that, the history of art loses all of its nuance and meaning, you know? Well, that's it in just a little nutshell, but it's fascinating discussion.
It is. Right
I
there
mean,
with
who
you.
had a like a world book set, you know, of encyclopedias when they were a kid? And you know, who would have imagined that, you know, you could have something in your pocket where you can literally look up the answer to any question, have it translated into any language, have it speak it to you in any other language. I mean,
Right.
it's like, you know, in our lifetimes, human, you know, the human experience has changed so dramatically. It's like impossible for me to think like, wow, like when my kid is my age, what is this planet going to look like? What is our human experience going to be like? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really pretty crazy. And like to even think back before the smartphone, you know, and like what that form factor and that, you know, the fact that you can have a computer in your pocket really like means for like what it's like to be a person. I mean, it's really, you know, changed everything, right? And you know, it's something that like I completely take it for granted unless I'm sitting in one of these salon sessions talking about obsolescence, you know. But it's kind of weird, you know. I mean, it's art, but I mean, it affects just so many, you know, so many aspects, and just, I mean, the book, you know, God forbid that goes away.
Yeah, right.
It could happen. It could. Like we don't use scrolls necessarily anymore, do we? Like they still exist. What's left of them still exists, but we stop using scrolls. So books could also end up being in a similar situation where there's something that comes and replaces books. Now, I don't have the mental capacity or imagination to imagine what that would be, but I'm sure it's possible. I can definitely imagine a world where that can happen. Yeah, books will be phones or like some like digital tablet. I mean, we're already kind of there with Kindles and whatnot, but like actually just having like going to a bookstore and buying a tablet that just is preloaded with a specific story or specific information and then purchasing that. Who knows?
But you know, it brings up also something that we haven't really touched on too much, I don't think, is the universals of art, where art lives on. It requires history, though, I think a lot of it, you know, to understand. Like Giotto, I look back at Giotto and I wouldn't think he's such great shakes if I didn't realize what turn in history, what he did changed, you know, from the period before, and how the Greco-Roman was changed, you know, by the Byzantine, and you know, but what are the universals in works of art? Someone typed about Nam June Paik. I think it maybe was Tommy. Well, I've always loved Nam June Paik. And I'm all about the emotions in art, of course, thinking too, but seriously, they're pieces you look at and they pull you. And he always had heart in his technology. There's always something in them that was so compelling, and it wasn't just about a concept of science, at least for me. And that's where I think that's where we want to keep. There are what are those universals? What are those stories that we keep telling over and over? I mean, that happens too, and it goes throughout all sorts of mediums and physical things. Like the book, maybe the book will be gone, but stories, people still love stories. I remember being a testing thing in the 80s where they were going to have you come in a theater and that you could decide what ending you wanted at the end. And James and I were very, you know, like Colin and other people and Michael Pierre and other people here, you know, you thought you were on the cutting edge at that time. So it was a very kind of private theater thing, of a brand new thing that was going to change theater. And, you know, nobody really wanted to change the endings. It's like interactivity. It's like, is an elevator button. Is that really interesting? I mean, we have to kind of get back to what, you know, an artwork has to have more than just innovation.
But that idea never actually completely died, because what happened with DVDs? Alternate endings on the DVDs that you could see. Like, it might not be the one that necessarily plays immediately, but you can go back. It's like, oh, I wonder how this would have happened, and then you have that option to view that. So that idea didn't completely die. It just manifests itself in a different way.
Yeah, probably so. Yes.
It reminds me of something that's happening locally with a dance troupe here, where you go this is where you go and you build the dance. Like the people in the audience actually, like the dancers are up on the stage and there's music, but you tell the dancers what to do. And so over a period of like 2 hours, it goes back and forth and the whole audience is a choreographer. It just made me think of that and how completely exciting that is for the people that are there. And it's a big draw. It used to happen, of course, a lot more before COVID, but they're starting to do it again. And usually they do it outside in the summertime. So that for here, that means like June, July, August in there. But the idea that people want to affect what artists are doing is very prevalent in those times that people are doing that. The other thing I've been thinking about while people are talking is how much it is a kind of human privilege for us as artists to be able to do what we're doing in terms of understanding how much has happened before us in the terms of art and how much is happening now and how I just think it's kind of chillingly exciting for me to understand that all of us, and my role is to look and interpolate what's going on, and that I have the ability to think about time and art and use that however I want. I mean, I think that's really an exciting idea. That's what I've been thinking.
Yeah.
Is an exciting idea.
Mhm.
And I was thinking too about this business of heart in our art, emotion or spirituality in our heart. One of the themes of literature is head versus heart. And I think that brings up all the issues that we've been talking about. If there's too much head and we become or create Frankensteins, that's a problem. If there's not enough heart, that's also a problem, that this sense of feeling, so that we don't end up with this sterile art that only speaks, does not speak to the human spirit, does not speak to those things that are important for all of us to have and maintain and share and leave for others.
When you say that, like, sterile art, the first thing that comes to my mind is the kind of, like, I guess it's a kind of corporate art, I guess, corporate or commercial art, where it's very distinct in what it is because it feels so lifeless. It's like, these are the silhouettes of people, but there's something missing.
Joseph Albers.
I'm sorry?
Joseph Albers.
Joseph Oliver?
No, but I mean, that's very, very sterile, and I wouldn't call that not worthwhile. I mean, he just sat there doing color variations, and I love the work. I don't think it has much heart, but it's very engaging. And I like the walking silhouettes too, frankly.
Well, I wasn't talking about that specific. Like, I wish I could pull up an example because, like, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and a lot of, like, the marketing and promotional material that a lot of companies like to share on LinkedIn, they usually hire. Normally, it's like a graphic designer, not even necessarily an artist, but like a graphic designer, to create something that, from the words of, like, my marketing friend, it's like, it's got to look nice, but not too nice. And it's a weird, like, balancing act of trying to be creative, but not creative enough to the point where, like, somebody's recognizing this as a piece of art. It like, the whole intention behind it is completely different than anything I'm familiar with anyway. It's weird.
The Muzak version of art.
But that's what was coming to mind. Like, purposely devoiding, like on purpose, removing the heart and spirit from the artwork so that you could sell a product.
Unless you remove that and make the art sterile because you're creating a message.
Right.
In other words, if you want to, you may want to show sterility, excuse me, in your art because you want to say something about it.
Right.
And so then the purpose of your art might be a little bit different. So I guess maybe using the word sterile in art, you have to think of it in different ways. And I think the way you mentioned, Devo, is, one of the ways where it could be sterile if the purpose is such that maybe it's only for commercialism, if you will.
Right.
I see it as like corporate art it's like so generic that it can upset anybody. It's just so bland and so manufactured that it just can't upset anybody, because there are people who will get upset if it's too red or if it's too blue, or
that's exactly what I was going. Yeah, that.
Yeah.
It's like when you have a message that's too broad and you don't really say a whole lot, right? Because you're too broad.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I don't know, I've always been one that liked to mix everything together with corporate. I had some really exciting, it might be getting into a different thing than what you're saying, but such excitement working inside the corporate art world at the World Financial Center, in the 90s. I mean, it was fascinating. And in the Renaissance, the tradespeople and the corporate and the money and the art and, of course, certain things rose to the top, but it was all one. It wasn't really a separation, because money is part of art. I mean, it just is. If you're a serious artist, it is. I mean, whether you're making it or not, it's part of the equation. So I don't know, mixing. I think that actually in the digital age, that's mixing up a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think that can be very powerful. Because you want to be able to make a living. It's we don't want to be so precious that we're out there and not part of the world. Go ahead.
I was going to say, or your Doctors Without Borders, and the art you bring to the papers that you send around the world, hoping to get people to donate. That's business of a sort. Their aim is not business, but their aim is to get people to, help these doctors around the world. So there's that kind of art that might be there. So I guess we really have to look at the intentions of the artist and the art and, what it's assigned with, whether it's a bland, I don't want to offend anyone type of art versus I want to get you involved art because we need help. We need doctors to go out there where no one will go.
Right.
And even from a commercial standpoint, you're in an ad agency setting and a creative director will say, well, drop the art in there, and it's just a different usage of what art means, right? It's an illustration. It's something made to sell product. Right. And I think that it's, from my point of view, there's good and bad commercial art usage, and compelling and not compelling, you know what I mean? Just like within fine art, I think that, a lot of what drove me in terms of developing this Techspressionism idea is to have some term to exclude everything other than personal expression when you're talking about it. You know what I mean? Because digital art is such a large umbrella. If you look up digital art on any social media platform, you're going to see a lot of work that's basically like illustration or commercial work that's produced for a specific purpose, not necessarily, fine art, which is a term that's also sort of loaded, you know what I mean? Saying well, is it some sort of quality level, and I think that the talk about the commerce component is important, because ultimately that's sort of what records certain artists in history or not. I don't think that Banksy is that much better of a street graffiti style artist than artist X. It's just that that person or consortium's work ended up being exchanged for a lot of money at auction. So all of a sudden it's valuable. It's made its place in art history because of that transactional component to it. You know what I mean? Like I think it's to some degree a little bit arbitrary and sort of luck of the draw. How did that
I think it's a lot of bit arbitrary.
completely. Or like, I mean, like Beeple's 3D renderings are pretty amazing, but I wouldn't say he's that much incredibly better than when you look at like the value of the work compared to like the next really good 3D animator or renderer or person. And he was completely a commercial artist, right? Prior to that's where he got his chops and all this other stuff. But it's like the Christie's sale was what made people pay attention to NFTs in the first place. But it isn't like the art was what made people pay attention, right? It was the price tag, so it's very strange. I mean, I guess it's sort of like straying a little bit from obsolescence, but it is and it isn't, because then a year or two down the road there'll be something else, just like it was like, oh, Jeff Koons and his like crazy metal bunnies or whatever they were, like it's like, oh, the shock value of what the price tag is for that, and then it's like the next thing where the general public's like, they paid what for what, and it seems like that's the narrative that like the general populace has with like fine art, is like, look how ridiculous that is, how expensive that is, and how ridiculous it is.
I think we could,
what I mean?
I think we could definitely drive that back into a discussion about obsolescence, because you have again another instance of something that's driving things becoming obsolete, like dollar signs or value attributions driving how things are pushed forward versus the things that are left behind, which no longer have value, and then they end up falling by the wayside. So that's kind of an important distinction that happens.
That's true, but look back at someone like Vermeer. I mean, he did what he did. He only had 23 paintings, I think, but he was not rediscovered he made a living as an artist, I mean, remember, there wasn't photography or anything else, and just, oil on canvas. And even the common people in the Dutch 17th century, which is that golden age of Dutch painting, everybody had 8 paintings in their home. I mean, it was the rise of the middle class at that time, but he wasn't known for a couple hundred years, and somebody found his work and donated it to the Met, and then he became he's like one of the hugest things ever. So you never really know, and you look back in time, and I'm not saying that we're going to become Vermeer, but it's just that. But
you don't know.
You don't know. You don't know, and that's a hopefulness too, because honestly, sometimes the people like the Beeples, and I actually like a lot of Beeples. I mean, 5,000 images. I mean, it was pretty interesting. At least it was of some interest. But I agree with what Colin was saying. But you never really know where your art's going to hit or influence someone, and I think that's an interesting point. I want to share with you before this discussion ends. I have to share a party I did in my backyard here in Shelter Island, New York, and it was called Burn Art, and it created a real stir out here. And I was doing it to be sort of in the face of, look, I'm not saying that we should burn books and art. The whole idea was that you could only burn your own work, and there's nothing more satisfying than tearing up a piece of work that you just cannot stand. I mean, I have slashed a canvas, and oh my gosh, it's refreshing. Death of art. And the party had these fake flames coming up, and people came and brought drawings. A woman who wrote for the East Hampton Star brought a script of hers. I'm sure she had a copy. And she went, "To the gods." And I videotaped it, and it's actually on my YouTube channel. It's horribly videoed by me. I am not a videographer, but it was one of the most funny, refreshing parties. And I mean, and I had this woman call me and go, "Braz, what are you doing? Burning art?" And I understand from the Jewish perspective of when, you can't burn books and being, ostracized and not being able to print, and censorship. I am totally not for censorship. But there's something refreshing about it. So I just want you guys to know, if we're all friends and I don't know, when I decide I'm ready to take my collection and burn it in the backyard, I think I'm gonna, this time, it was a really fun party with marshmallows and lots of fun. But people were burning art and we'd say, oh, are you sure? They say, yes, it has to go. You couldn't burn anybody else's work. But I'm gonna have another one of these. People keep saying, Roz, you've got to bring that burn art party back. And I'm gonna burn, I'll have a burn art party and I'll have an auction along with it. So I'll go, really? Does it have to go to the fire? And then maybe it does. Anyway, I just thought this would be kind of a fun epitaph for this conversation of obsolescence.
You could totally have a digital version of that too, but I think it'd probably be a lot less flashy, but like a ritual recycle bin dumping.
Maybe we have an NFT, like you guys are all part of it and we take burn art to the screen, you know?
Well,
It
people
is
have been
calling
doing
burning the
that.
tokens,
Yeah, and also like people have been making physical work and minting it and then burning the
Burning it,
physical
yeah.
object to create scarcity. You know, like that's definitely something that's like a thing now, apparently,
Whoa.
within the NFT community. And you know, it seems gimmicky, but it's also something that like I had thought about before NFTs existed. Like I
Yeah.
made a couple pieces that I thought, oh, these are sort of my alchemy series, and I'll make them, scan them in, destroy the things, and then there's just this digital thing. And now it's, you know, I mean,
I had the opposite thing happen too. Like I was thinking about like when I was trying to figure out what the heck an original meant for me, like what the heck an original painting meant for me, because I work all digitally. Like there's no physicality to my work until I decide to make a print of it.
Yeah.
So there was a point where I was like, well, I guess I could do something where like I'll make one print of it and then delete the digital file that created it. And then there will only be the physical print left. I was like, but would that be too gimmicky? Like, would people understand? And I never went through with it, but I still think about that kind of thing in my mind where, you know, because everything that I make is essentially a reproduction or bringing physicality to something that was never physical.
Yeah.
It's you get into a weird mindset.
or is it a reproduction? You know, like, you know, is the actual art the file, the code?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
something that I like, you know, I
still
always,
wrestling with that idea. I'm still
you know,
wrestling
and then
with
the
it.
physical object is like a manifestation of the piece, but it's
Totally.
not the
I think
piece,
so.
you know?
Yeah.
I think that would be a great idea, Davo, if you also put alongside it, should you decide to get rid of the file and print it, alongside it, this whole commentary that you're presenting right now about why you did it.
Yes.
You know, I had this file, I had, you know, I've given you the physical manifestation. I think it's a special kind of way to present it.
It is.
It is
Or
very
you could make the
thoughtful.
work and never print it. Like a lot of the work that I do on paper, if it's like something composed to be an overprint, like I don't save the file after I print it, you know, just print it and close it out, you know, that way
It's gone.
it's gone.
If you're doing a limited edition print though, and you know, say you're doing just 3, and then you're supposed to destroy the file, right? The original. If you're selling it as a limited edition print. So that's kind of the way the world seems to handle that right now. But I do think Davo's making an interesting point.
This
I'm not
topic
sure
made me
if
think
you've
too
ever-
about this. You guys ever hear of time wave zero, or this idea of novelty theory? There was a guy, Terence McKenna, who wrote a lot about like sort of ethnobotany and other things, but this idea of a novelty theory where, you know, as history progresses, things have to be more and more extreme for people to even notice them, right? And I feel like
Mhm.
that's happening right now in our society, you know, like something that's completely shocking, like the pandemic, you know, and then like a couple months in, it's like, oh yeah, like what's the death toll today, you know, on TV every single day.
It's
And
normalized.
like you're just numbed to it. And then it's like, I feel like we're on the heels of like this next thing that's happening now in Ukraine and everything else like that. It's like, oh, like how insane does this have to be for like people to notice it. And my wife is so, watching the news, like, aren't we supposed to like have evolved? Like, no, we're animals, that's the bottom line. Humans are animals, and that's
Darn
not
lizard
gonna change.
brain. Darn
Yeah.
lizard brain. I actually have a good friend of mine. He tells me, he's like, you'd probably be a lot less disappointed with the world when you understand that humanity still, at its very core, it's still a bunch of apes. Like that's what we are. We're just a little bit more sophisticated than the ones that don't wear clothes, but deep down, that's what we are. And a lot of the things that happen, it's not surprising through that lens. And I was like, you have a point, but that sucks.
Well, we can't erase all the amazing things we've done too.
Right.
Symphonies and art and
right.
I agree. There's some poem by a guy, somebody's named Anonymous, and it starts with, what's the surprise? We were born of risen apes, not fallen angels. But then look at our symphonies and look at our, it is the human experiment. I agree, it's still out there we still are beasts, but we also aren't. I don't know what's gonna win.
Well, there was one thing that happened recently that I thought was really, it made me feel good, was that in this show, the Techspressionism show, there's going to be a grid of work that gets fabricated from artists all over the place. And there's a Ukrainian artist and a Russian artist in the grid of work. And the Russian artist messaged me and he's like, in light of what's going on, I feel like I would like to donate, whatever, if my work sells, to where it's needed. And I was like, wow, like that's cool. Like to get a message like that. It's
Wonderful.
It's reaffirming like faith in humanity a little bit,
It is, yeah.
We all could use little spurts like that, because sometimes they're few and far in between.
Well, when you look at the Russian people, what they're doing, I can put up a Kalashnikov and I honestly can't take any money for a gun that I've drawn that at this point that relates to what's going on as it does. But for me to say, I'm going to give the proceeds if it sells is so different than a Russian being arrested in their country. They might be taken off to Siberia. We're so lucky to be in, those of us who live where we are not, oppressed.
When you look at all the terrible things that are going on, you have someone like Zelensky, who is absolutely incredible in his courage. I probably would have taken the ride out of the country, but this man stays there. And then, of course, all those other people we don't know about within Ukraine that are doing things, marvelous, unbelievable, unspeakably courageous acts. The woman in Russia who gets on the television station news and holds up that sign, who has a little child at home and risks everything, her job, her friends, prison, to do that. So when we talk about, the ugly side of human nature, there is also this beauty. The problem is we don't hear about it enough. The drumbeat of the news is always the bad, the bad. What can we get you to think is new? And to shock you, to get you to pay attention, as Colin was mentioning earlier. But we don't see those other acts, we don't see those other acts, but they're there.
And they can be really, really small, because one of the Russian artists who's in Techspressionism messaged me to say that the NFT that he had up for sale, he wanted to take the money from that and give it to his Ukrainian friend whose wife was pregnant and they're fleeing the country. And it just touched me that he would just do that, just as the other artist as well. And, people are so sincere with me, at least when we message back and forth. And my mentor in the NFT program is in Lublin in Poland. He's 100 kilometers from where the fighting is, and he has 3 kids. And he said to me, I'm not afraid, but I don't have peace of mind right now. And he's helping organize mattresses and clothing and food for all the refugees that are pouring into Poland. So you know, people they have good hearts.
Yes.
I think so too.
I mean, the internet is almost, you know, it's like a way of people being accountable, you know, or at least having people have the ability to communicate as long as they have access to it, you know. I mean, it's pretty, you know, hard to imagine what it would be like in a place where, I mean, I guess they've tried to like cut access off, right? I mean, and then people can drop in satellite, you know, routers or whatever else. I mean, you know, and something like crypto where people are still able to transfer funds to each other as individuals in that way. It's like a mechanism that like humans have developed to like preserve ourselves somehow, you know. I mean, I don't know, you know. I definitely think that the internet is some sort of like protection layer for the human species, right? I mean, in some way, like it like allows us to see what's going on in these places, and people can broadcast onto social media like what's happening in these places. Like that was never a possibility, you know.
Just Zelensky
And the
being
flip
able to
side of
talk.
that and the flip side of that is the obsolescence of privacy and solitude.
That's what, like, I actually was talking to my wife not too long ago about this. I was like, it's like, as many good things that the internet has provided for humanity, there's a whole slew of not so great things that it's also provided. So it's literally like it's a double-edged sword. But when you actually really think about it, it's not even a double-edged sword. It is a tool, and tools inherently can be used in a wide variety of ways. Like you can't just take a tool and be like, no, you only have this use for this one purpose. No, somebody's going to use it for other ways. Like create, their imagination is pretty much the limit to what the tool's used for. And I don't know, I understand that as a tool, it does have a great capacity to bring about tremendous, like even exponential positive change. But it also has the inverse of that. It has the potential to bring about an disproportionate amount of negativity as well. And you know, that does reflect the duality of humanity itself. Like we have the capacity for both greatness, like great positivity, and great negativity. So it's, I don't know, the internet is kind of, I guess, a parallel of humanity itself, like in its base essence.
Who would have thought 50 years ago that Zelensky could talk to all the big nations of the world? I mean, just the fact that there he is in his t-shirt, you know, fighting a war, looking worse and worse and more haggard, but he's talking to the UK, he's talking to the United States, he's talking to all these countries, and they're there and they're
All their people.
Yeah.
Yes, who have that media access, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that he doesn't need to go in the news. He can be there and talk. Who would have thought 50 years ago that he could do that? And he could be, when he talks about, he wanted Biden, when he talked to the US, to be the leader of world peace. He's the leader of world peace, Zelensky, in what he's doing. To talk to all these people, to unite us behind him is just, to me, it's totally mind-boggling. And Davo, I agree with you 100% about the internet and it being a tool, and anything can be used for good or bad. You can take a pencil that you write with and stab somebody with it. It's all about the intention of the user, what you're going to do with the tool. And
Can also have accidental side effects too.
yes.
Back to your pencil metaphor. I actually have a relevant story about a pencil being accidental use. So I came home from school one day, and I came into the room, and I don't know what happened or what sparked it, but my brother started chasing me around. Like I had my pencil in hand, I was about to start my homework, So I started running from him. I tried to jump up on the bed to get away from him, and he jumped up and pushed me. I fell on the pencil with my neck. I got stabbed right here in my neck. Fell on the pencil on the bed. That could have killed me. Completely unintentional accident kind of thing happened. Like it just happened to be the wrong situation, the wrong time, and I was holding it at just the right angle for that to happen. But again, like it was this tool that was about to be used for my homework accidentally, like I could have accidentally been killed by it. And it's one of those things, like the internet, that kind of thing, we can see that happen too, where the internet can have just unforeseen accidental side effects that we wouldn't have even thought about until it actually happens.
Or the fact that everything on like the power grid is so interconnected through the internet now. And, you know, the irony is like it was originally created to create redundancy for nuclear technology so that if one, you know, base or Los Alamos or wherever got wiped out, you know, that was the origin story of ARPANET, right, which became the internet. And, you know, I mean, it's sort of achieving its goal now in a way, in sort of like a larger sense, right? But like on the flip side, it's like, well, now that everything is connected, you know, nation states or individuals, groups could shut off people's access to utilities, all that other stuff.
Yes, cyber war is here. Definitely.
The pipeline that ended up getting hacked here in the US not too far back, which that was kind of funny too in some ways, because the people that did it, the hackers, they actually issued an apology after the fact. They're like, oh, we didn't actually realize that this particular company controlled so much. It was like, we were just doing.
We blew up a Russian natural gas pipeline about 15 years ago. You know, it's happened. And the other thing I wanted to say is, you know, Churchill and FDR got on the radio, and they were communicating with people the same way that Zelensky is doing now. It's a progression in many ways. And the thing that has really happened with the internet is the democratization of the ability to communicate.
Yes.
On sort of on a level playing field, or on a playing field that's a lot thinner between the people really in power and the average person.
Yeah, it's the democratization of the universe. The internet provides that. And so anyone with any message can deliver it. And that's good, and it's not so good, depending on who it is and what their intentions are.
Well, this conversation, if it's that's a rather negative thing to say, but if the world blows up into smithereens, you know, and someone ever finds this disc, you know, it might this could be the Rosetta Stone for what was going on. I don't know. You know, it's been a very interesting conversation. It really has.
That it has. And I think we're actually at time, right? Like our time's only supposed to go to 7. And it feels like we could probably keep going for a while too. But unfortunately, we do probably have to wrap things up. So as riveting as a conversation this is, as engaged as all of you are, those of you that have been contributing and participating, we have to call it quits for now. But it's been a pleasure. Oh, yeah.
That's been good.
Are you gonna say
Do you
something,
think
Colin?
we should alternate and think about having presenters for the next one before we
Yeah, I think
close?
that's
They're gonna
nice.
solicit anyone here, first dibs, if you want to present. You're on
Yeah.
record.
See, the other part about this group is that as much as people like to talk sometimes, they're also very shy when it comes to things like this.
I've already presented several times, so I feel it would be nice to have someone who has not.
Ben?
I would like to, however, I won't be able to make the next one. So I'll send you some info, Colin, maybe about a month from now, if that works. I'll have to check that one too.
Sure.
I too would like to present again, but after I'm done with taxes, like maybe in
I still need to do mine.
Taxes will never be obsolescent.
They could be.
Sadly,
They could
no.
be in this country anyway. But there's certain powers that be that don't want us to have nice things, and that's why we have to keep filing taxes every year.
They don't file them in Europe.
Right. And we could have that here, but lobbyists from like Tax Cut and H&R Block, they actually fought that. Yeah, they actually fought it, and that's why we still have to file taxes, because they were like, we were going to be out of business if you do it automatically.
Quicken.
But that's a whole other
Yeah.
But yeah. So we have Gregory.
I'll send you an email. Is that the best way to?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's actually on the Salon page too, there's a form
Okay.
where you could submit like a presentation request. That's probably the best way to do it, because then I think it'll go to both Davo and myself. And we could sort of like slot in people as they come in, and you could select a time, or it could be open-ended. I'm pretty much happy with these sort of open mic sessions too, though, because then it takes the pressure off having to hound people to be a presenter. So
Maybe see how it goes, and there are tons of topics, layers. I mean, layers of what? Layers could be layers technology of meaning. I mean, that would be a possible if you don't get someone to present.
yeah, and I also like the idea of like, incorporating brief 5-minute presentations about relevant to the topic, so it incorporates screen share, like, hey, show us a piece, like everyone just shows a piece, you know what I mean? And it's about a particular
That's a
topic,
good idea.
you know what I mean? That way there's visuals and it's incorporating the art into the recording, but also conversation.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So are we saying that the previous versions of the salons are becoming obsolete? Is that what's happening?
Maybe. Maybe.
You have to morph with the times.
Right.
They're all evolving.
Well, I think the previous format, it encourages people to like come in, see, oh, there's an opportunity to like show my stuff, and then they just never return again. Whereas like I like that there's, a group that like gets to know each other, and there's ongoing conversation, and we're familiar with each other's work. Like that's, to me, what I envision the point of this being, not just sort of like a mini TED talk where like any random person just comes in and then they never come back. You know what I mean? Like that's no fun.
I certainly enjoy being able to say what's in my mind when other people are talking, because I'm sure many of us are having stream of all kinds of thoughts while we're working or during the week. And I enjoy being able to listen to what other people are thinking, and then, oh, okay, like I've been thinking about this part of that. And I like that there's a place to voice that kind of process. So thanks.
Platforms are always nice to have.
Maybe Cullen or Davo, if you might want to put it out there to the group, and explain it a little bit of what you're looking for. It might bring more people into it.
I mean, I don't even know what that is, other than
I would
what
have
sort of consensus is, right? I mean, I think it should just be what the consensus is and what everyone. I mean, we can continue this after the recording stops, but I think like the whole idea of what this is supposed to be, I think, at least from my personal perspective, is it's sort of like a group conscience more than like any one or two people deciding what it should be, because that's the most organic way it could evolve and develop, I think. I mean, this whole idea of a topic-based salon, I think, is really good in the sense that it allows for more conversation. And I think this sort of Brady Bunch style, format isn't something that's very common, right? Like, I mean, on YouTube or whatever, it's usually like one talking head talking to another talking head for a little while, and then they sort of like switch out. And like, the idea of the salon is that it's just like a conversation that might have happened in a bar or a coffee shop or someone's living room, you know, like.
I have another idea too, is that maybe you come up with a topic and we might create artwork that reflects that topic, and then maybe some people would like to share that, not that everyone would have to take it on. That could be,
I like that.
Yeah, it could just be like a part of the salon, and other things could happen in the salon as well, but it could be a part, and depending on how many people have that work and share it, and we could talk about it, and then, would tie into that topic. And it would be a challenge, just
I like that
you
for an next
enter-
salon. That way I don't have to like go and find people, but we're all here and like we could all, I like that idea, because then it's like, hey, if someone wants to make something and bring something, it could even be something you've had already.
Right.
What do you guys think? Like,
Yeah,
any
I'm down for that.
suggestions, topic suggestions for that
topic
format?
suggestions.
Yeah, that's what we do. When we enter exhibitions, call for entry, they have, very often they'll have a topic, and then you create it or you have it already, and then you submit it. And so we'd be submitting it obviously to the
I like
group,
that.
and we can
too.
talk about the work and how we created it. And I think that'd be fun. I'd love
Cynthia,
to.
do you have any topic suggestions, or does anyone have any topic suggestions for
Well,
that?
I know Roz was talking about layering, layers,
Renata?
whether it's layers of meaning or whatever.
Renata?
I was going to say pretty much what Cynthia said, that a show and tell rather than just a talk or just a conversation like we had today.
Yeah.
With a screen share.
Visuals. Yeah.
With a screen share. I don't know, my microphone's cutting out, but I just wanted to say maybe we could do a technique rather than a topic. So like collage.
Yeah, that'd be great. Collage would be perfect.
I think that's good. And maybe for that, like we could go back to the very early days of like, in the beginning, if you want to share, put your name in the chat or show up a little early. That way, like there's sort of like, a semi format of like people who come with their homework get to go, you know what I mean? And it makes it probably easier for the moderator that way too, a little bit,
It's a nice idea.
Yeah.
Collage.
I'm down.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any opposed?
Nay,
right.
no, I'm kidding. All right. Well, on that note, we are actually several minutes over our scheduled recording time.
Oh, I need
not that it was wasted or anything like that, but we are over. But I wanted to say again, thank you for attending. Thank you for your contributions to this discussion. It's always a blast with all of you. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to leave. Can't stay for
thanks,
a
Dava.
chat afterwards. I'm gonna get out of here, but
I have
thanks.
to go.
Great.
Bye-bye.
All right. Signing off.
Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Dava, you want to count us down?
Sure. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're out.